In this lab, we're going to do a flowchart. Now, we use a flowchart for many different reasons. The main one is to show a process via a picture rather than writing it out in a narrative form. Many times you'll find, for example, with procedures that can be found in policy and procedure manuals at your clinical sites or where you eventually will work, that along with the procedure that is written out in narrative form, a procedure is just step-by-step instructions on how to do a certain task. They'll also have a flowchart attached that shows the same thing, but it's just in a picture form. Now, in quality improvement, some of you have already had that class. Some of you will have that class. When you do your quality improvement project, you'll have to do a flowchart. So I just wanted to show you how to do that. And in this lab, just as in the last, we're going to do it in PowerPoint. You can also do this in Word, in Microsoft Word. But let's do it in PowerPoint. And on your instructions, I've given you the steps involved in a medical or health information process. And that process is pulling a medical record for a request. If we get a request for a medical record, for example, the patient's in the emergency room and we have to pull that record, then these are the typical steps that you would see on a procedure for pulling a record. So I've listed those for you already, but I also gave you some instructions under the procedure section to tell you how to set up the page and also your font settings, those types of things for your flowchart. The first thing you need to do is to do your slide layout in portrait, not in landscape. Landscape is bigger side to side. Portrait, the page is bigger up and down. So to do that, go to the Home tab. That's usually what you'll be on as soon as you open PowerPoint. Click Layout. First thing I want you to do is do a blank page. But then I also want you to put this in Portrait, and you do that by going under the Design tab. Notice it says Slide Orientation. So if you click, you have the choice of Landscape or Portrait, but we want it in Portrait. Okay. Usually in a flowchart, it's not as wide as it is long, and so we always usually want to do that in Portrait. When you're doing a flowchart, and you will learn this in your quality improvement class, there are certain symbols that we use, and those symbols mean certain things. So you can't just use any shaped symbol. And again, you'll learn that in your quality improvement class, so this isn't a class on all the symbols in flowcharts, but you will need to use the correct ones, but I'll show you which ones they are. And we want to start off our flowchart by inserting a shape. You'll go to the Insert tab and then go to Shapes. As you go down the list, you'll see there's a whole section here that has the shapes that are used in flowcharts. Always at the beginning and at the end of a flowchart, you have an oval, and that signals start or stop on a flowchart. So they always have to start with this and end with this symbol. And so when you pick out the symbol, you think, well, that second one, that looks like an oval, but that's not the one. Hold your mouse on it and see how it's named. If you'll come down here, it says Flowchart Terminator, meaning end. So this is the beginning and the end symbol that you'll use in your flowchart. So when you click on your symbol, you'll see the little X appears. You go to the top, and we can move these after we put them in, but drag your mouse, let up, and there is your symbol. In your instructions, I'll tell you what color your symbol should be and also the font size. And so if they're not in that color or the font is not that size, let me show you how to change that. If you will go to, notice it says drawing tools because that's what we're using right now, and you can go to format. You have the fill, the text effects, those types of things, but also your particular shapes that you're inserting. You can format the fill here and also the outline color. So if we click just on the choices that are given, 3 usually show up, but there's a scroll menu here and you can go down and find many different colors and varieties. Now on this one I just want it very plain and simple, white with black text and black lines around all the objects. And so let's choose the first one, and I want you to then, to ensure that all of the shapes will show up with this same format, right click, and notice as you go down it's set as default. So just set as default, and then all of them will be that way rather than having to change the colors as you go along. So if your shape has all the drag handles around it, meaning it's selected, you can type into it. And so you just type, that's not how you spell start. There you go. So we're at very first thing and the very last thing, start and stop. So we put start in, and we can change the size. If we don't need our shape to be this big, we can use these drag handles, hold our mouse down, and make things smaller. Now I did say have your font at 12. And so if we select that and right click, we can see this is actually at 18. And so we want to change that to 12. And then again, set as default. So all of our shapes will have that same. Now that looks kind of small, but it's just all relative. It's how you're seeing it on the screen. And you can actually zoom and make this larger. Down here, you'll see at the very bottom we're on 59%. So if we want to see what we're typing, we just make it bigger or smaller. It's not affecting the size of the actual document. It's just the way we see the document. Okay. We want to go down through our steps, and on a flowchart, go back to insert because we want to put in the first step, or actually the second step. Our first step is to start, and we want to insert a shape. And anytime there is a step in a process that's actually an action that someone should complete, that's shown in a rectangle. So see where we hold our mouse over there, it says flowchart and it says process. So this is a process really within the process. So this is something that, this is a step that should be completed. So we always put those in rectangles. And so we click on that, we put our rectangle in, and then we type, what is that step? Determine medical record, and I abbreviated that, number. And always remember you can return, don't do it very wide. And where do we determine the medical record number? In the master patient index. Okay, so that's our next step. So we can, you'll notice you have 1, 2, 3, 4 steps, and then, and I'm not going to type all of these in, that's your job. The next step will also be in a rectangle until you come to something that's known as a decision. And in a flowchart, if that process, if you're going along and in the process, you have to make up your mind and say, did this happen? Yes or no? That will determine what the next step is, depending on whether the answer to the question is a yes or a no. So as you see in our steps in locating a medical record, that we looked up the medical record number, then we looked in the permanent file to determine where the chart was, and then we have, sometimes when you go to the file, the record's not there. And remember, back in 151 and 152, we talked about a locator system. And so if it's not in the permanent file, it should be checked out in that locator system, and we should be able to go to it, determine where it is. But we look at that. We look in the permanent file as our next step. And again, I'm not going to put this on there. That's your job to do. And then we have to ask ourselves, okay, we went to the permanent file. Was the chart there? And anytime there's a decision in a process, you use the diamond shape. So we're going to insert that diamond. Remember, we can move things around if we don't get them situated just like we want them. And the question that we ask ourselves is the record there. And let's stretch this out. So that record, the word was not separated. We have to have a question mark. Remember, anytime there's a decision, it's a question. And this is doing automatic capitalization of the first letter on a line, and I don't want it to do that. And so I can click underneath it and say stop auto capitalizing first letters of sentences. And so it will quit doing that. Okay, anytime we ask a question, there's two alternatives. The answer is either yes or it's no. And you'll notice here, if is the record there? Yes. Then the next step is pull the chart and then stop. You finish that whole process. But what if the answer is no? Then we determine, we have an extra step in there. Then determine the location of the chart in the chart locator system. Then pull the chart and then stop. And notice, if the answer is yes, steps 5 and 6 are the same as steps 6 and 7 if the answer is no. So we don't need to type those steps over and duplicate it if there are some steps that will be identical. And so remember, if we ask a question, we always have to have a yes and no answer. And so the best way to do this is I'm going to go on in and show you on our auto shapes. And this isn't under the flowchart part. These are up under the lines. You have your arrow. But notice it's blue. You remember initially when I said, okay, right click on an object. And this is just an object that you've inserted. And notice when I right clicked on it, or when I clicked on there, the drag handles for the little arrow showed up, just like it would around a box or anything else. But if I right click and have that selected, again, set as default line. Whoops, I didn't change the color. So, design, or here's another trick, just double click on it and it will take you to, excuse me, I said design, I meant format, and you can pick out the line color that you want. I said everything in here should be in black and white. So let's pick the first one. We changed the color, but we want that color to remain. We won't have to do this every time we put a line or an arrow in. And so if you right click on it, set default, then they'll all be in that same color. So I'm going to insert another line or arrow. And notice I got that one kind of crooked. Just click on it, use the drag handles, and you can drag it and fix it and get it perfect. Okay, then we came to this question, which you'll do many times when doing a flow chart. And we said you have to have a yes answer and a no. There's not a third answer. It's always yes and no. So we want to put an arrow to, okay, go do this if the answer, let's say, for example, if the answer is no, and we want to go this way if the answer is yes. Now we need to indicate that. We need to indicate that this direction means no, this means yes. And we could do it the opposite way. There's no right and wrong as long as we then put the appropriate steps in. Now remember in the previous lab where I told you that you can't normally just in a PowerPoint, you can't just start typing text. It won't show up unless you're typing it in a box or in a particular place. And so, remember I said you put a text box in. And so, let's put a text box right here to indicate this is what we're going to do if the answer to that question is no. That font's very, very big, so I'm going to change it. And then let's put a text box to indicate, and you remember you find your text box by under Insert on the Insert tab and then go to Text Box. And then this, we can put it on either side, but we don't put it in a rectangle. That means something with Flowchart. And so it's not necessarily a process. You're making a decision. So we don't want this in a rectangle. We don't insert one of the shapes. We're just typing. We just want to type text. So that indicates when someone's following this flowchart, I start the process, I do this step, and remember yours is going to have another step in here. Then I have to make a decision. And what is the first thing you're supposed to do if the decision is no, the record was not in the permanent file? Then, in this process, we have to determine the location of the chart in the locator system. And look, it doesn't all fit in, so then we manipulate the size of our rectangle as we need to. Then, what do we do if the answer is yes? We have another rectangle that tells us, okay, is the record there? If it is, then pull the record or pull the chart. The same thing here. Is the record there? No, we had an extra step. Then find out where it is. So determine the location of the chart in the locator system. But after we've done this, the steps that remain are identical to the ones if we've decided that yes, the record's there and we've pulled it. And so what we can do is just loop around rather than coming down here and putting pull chart and then stop. We can loop back into here, and we do that by inserting. Remember, we always go the direction of the arrow. And so what we can do is just put a straight line here or an arrow pointing the right direction. Remember, where we start the arrow is where the flat surface will be, and the actual point of the arrow will be where we lift up from our mouse. And so then we have to loop it in, so we'll put another arrow and begin it where we ended the first one. And sometimes you have to play with it to get them straight. And notice there's a gap here, so I'm going to click on this one and pull it down just a little bit. And so if we follow our arrows, we're going to do this, or we just go in one direction. We're going down here. We're going to do this. And then we have one final step, which is to stop. And I'm not going to put that in. I'm going to let you do it. But remember, it's identical to start. You use that same symbol, and there always has to be a stop to tell somebody the process is over. So again, as you look at this, know that you're going to have an extra step or two in here, but you also have your arrows to indicate, okay, which direction do I go in if the answer is no to my decision, and what's yes as far as my decision. And we've put our arrows, and there always have to be arrows to tell us where to go after each step. It doesn't have to be straight down. It just, we follow the arrows. And so once we started, we could have put determine medical record number over here with an arrow going this way and then start down, but we can only go in one direction. Okay. Again, you need to put your name on your assignment. So what do we say we do? We insert text box, make a text box, and type the name. Type your name. Now notice when I clicked off that in this text box there's not a border around it. You can make a border by double clicking. Always remember when you're in an object, if you just click in it and then double click, it'll let you format. So if we wanted a border, I'm saying don't put one because it can be confusing with the rectangles you're using, but if you wanted to format your text box, you can put borders around it. You can put different colors in the fill and all of those types of things. And so you can manipulate it by double clicking on it. I'm going to go back up here and remove the border. So outline, I don't want one. So there we go. Now I had mentioned that once you're through, sometimes you'll find if there's a lot of steps in the process, you're going to start running off the bottom of the page, or you may do this. You may start it too low. You can move things independently of each other, each of these objects, and so you just click on something and then you can move it. But what if we don't want to go through and have to move everything? Say it was really off center. Do you remember when I told you in the last lab, if you'll do a Control A, it highlights everything, and so when you move it, you move everything. So once you're through, move it on the page and get it centered. Don't have everything just scrunched up at the top or at the bottom. So again, Control A, Control A, move, and we can move everything in our flowchart at once, and we don't have to move things separately. So those are the basics. Remember that here's your start. Your stop's going to look just like it. Any particular step in the process that needs to be accomplished will be in a rectangle, decisions in a diamond. There are many other symbols in flowcharts. For example, if there was a document involved that you had to access, then there's a little picture for a document, and there's one for a delay. If you're having a process, if you have to wait on something else being done in order to progress through the process, then there's all types of symbols. These are the basic symbols. And so, again, you'll use this not only in this class, but in other classes and definitely in the workplace.